Playing Soul Calibur with other people can be a good time. Playing the main campaigns can also be a good time, depending on which game that is. I'm not talking about the traditional arcade ladders. Most of these single player campaigns are essential to unlock more fighters, weapons, and even more modes. This video will rank which one is the worst to the best.
Subjective video obviously, by the way.
Starting with the lowest of the low, Soul Calibur Legends. The whole game sucks. Long story short, the controls and targeting system are the main issues. It's one of those Wii games that demand you to play with the Wiimote and nunchuck. Unless if you use the Dolphin emulator and make some configurations. Unlike me, I had to make an authentic experience. Most of the stages repeat but with different paths. The boss battles repeat too. Also, the story is all lies. Lies! I've already talked about this game in great detail on an old video back on my former channel. I ain't playing that game again. Ever wonder why the series needed a reboot? This half-baked story mode is also the lowest, but at least the gameplay is fine. Most of the time you play as Patroclus. He is needlessly the worst protagonist. He's a murdering, whiny Mr. Self-Important that has a sister complex. You know, come to think of it, he's sort of like Iska. Hera isn't much better either, she's just Tira's hoe. The only characters that I liked besides the returning cast were Zwei and Viola. When I first saw his design, he looked villainous. I wanted him to be the villain, but it had to be Nightmare again, despite being someone who totally isn't Raphael. Oh, and Pyrrha becomes the next Nightmare, sort of. Also, Soul Calibur is evil too. Why? Because screw it, that's why. I'm guessing it's the other side of the coin. The structure of the story mode is nothing special. They're just 3-round fights, some of them have you fight multiple foes. It's also too easy. The only time I had a hard time with it was during the final boss. They were going to extend the story some more by adding more characters, but couldn't due to time constraints. Even with all that nonsense, the gameplay is still solid and has a variety of modes to pick from, including legendary souls which you unlock after beating the story. Fun times. This is another version of Soul Calibur 4. At least the customization is better despite going back to the Soul Calibur 3-way due to the PSP hardware. The main campaign in Broken Destiny leaves much to be desired. The Gauntlet is basically a glorified tutorial that is mostly trial and error. You rarely fight anyone for real. It's meant to teach you how to understand the mechanics, but the whole time you're tasked to do a certain move, dodge, counter guard, impact, instead of, I don't know, fighting your opponent. It's easier to understand the game just by normal battles. The only time you ever do that is during the final battle with Al Ghul. The story itself is nonsense. I couldn't really tell what was going on. It's not a serious story, it's mostly Cassandra, Hill, and Dampier goofing around with the rest of the cast one at a time. The game even tells you that it's non-canon. That still doesn't excuse the poor execution. Again, it would be better to fight characters normally while giving out bonus objectives by doing certain actions instead of what we got. Edgemaster mode in Soul Blade is rough. It's the most brutal out of all the main campaigns in the series. And this is the first game, by the way. It's got a cool looking intro that shows a glimpse of the weapons that you can get. But this is where the CBT starts. Yeah, I'm not gonna beat around the bush here. The enemy AI is like fighting against it in the vanilla arcade version. Even the first stage can be difficult. Along with the harsh AI, there are certain conditions depending on the stage. You either start with less HP, have a short amount of time, run your opponents out to win, air combo to deal damage, using super attacks to deal damage, or worst of all, fight multiple enemies with one life. Some of these fights combine with other effects that I listed. I wouldn't mind the air combo condition if it was on the later games instead of here. This game is stiff compared to the rest of the games. Most of the fights reward you with weapons. Some are pretty bad and some are stronger than they should be. Don't even get me started on the legendary weapons. Yes, most of them are good, but trying to get them is a bitch. Instead of defeating Soul Edge to get it, you had to find it on previous missions. It's best to deal with Cervantes and Soul Edge and then save your file, and then go to either Voldo or Siegfried's stage since they're the closest. If you goof up, the weapon relocates and you have to reload the save. At least with playing as Cervantes, you don't have to deal with that noise since you unlock his last weapon before the final stage. Speaking of beating the mode, it shows off their arcade version endings. I will give it some credit for having unique stories for each character. The routes they take are different. I still rated this lower mostly because of the unfair difficulty and winning conditions. It's one thing to be challenged later on, but having ridiculous conditions combined with the input reading AI, even in the early stages, is another thing. Mission Battle is a slightly better Edgemaster mode but without the extra weapons. No, I'm not counting Edgemaster's weapon. Almost the same deal as before, you can change any character you want. The AI isn't too bad to deal with, but it's not as memorable as even Edgemaster mode. The objectives aren't as punishing, most of them have basic conditions. There are some BS fights. You'll earn these points to buy artwork in the gallery. The Xbox 360 version removed this mode along with the currency and intro. Not much else to talk about since Mission Battle is mid at best. It's not really memorable to be honest. I'd still rather play this than the previously mentioned. Part 1 of Soul Calibur 4. Tower of Lost Souls has two ways. Ascend is battling multiple enemies. You can also use multiple characters to tag out, but not all floors have you do that. There are extra conditions to unlock items. Extra gold is rewarded if you've already bought them. They give out vague messages instead of telling you right away. Some want you to fight solo, switch a bunch of times, ringing yourself out, no I am not kidding, break their armor, or don't get hit at all. Descent is pretty much a survival mode. Get through as many floors as you can until you die. This is the main reason why I gave Soul Calibur 4's customization so much shit. They want you to customize your character or else you'll kiss the floor often. The AI naturally gets harder in the later floors of course. That's because they have juiced up stats. It's hell if you're trying to play it vanilla. You have to have a customized fighter with specific gear to have higher stats, with weapons that aren't primaries, and hope to Hephaestus that they're the right stats to put in the skills you need to get past a floor or two. As for the last floor against Algol, fuck that noise. Descending is more enjoyable than going up. Every fifth floor you face off against a weird looking character. Don't let their goofy looks deceive you. They're strong and annoying. It's best to have healing and anti-ring out effects. Hope you have enough room for A. I do have a love-hate relationship with this mode. It's neat going through these battles, discovering ways to unlock gear, but at the same time you spend just as much time managing stats in the customization to stand a chance. One of the two story modes in Soul Calibur 6, so this is part 1 for it too. Everyone has their own story chronicle, not just the main story. Speaking of which, the main story is pretty much a retelling of Soul Calibur 1's story since it's a reboot. It's like a visual novel instead of FMV's or Soul Calibur 5 slideshow. I'm usually not a fan of this visual novel style. I just skip to the good parts. They did it for budget reasons, I get it, but even with that, at least show some more illustrations instead of portraits. There are a few in-game cutscenes in this game. As for the story itself, for what it is, it's simple yet decent story. Killick goes on an adventure to pursue Nightmare and defeat him while dealing with his malfestation. The whole roster has their own stories. The base roster stories are shorter than the main one. Few of them need to be unlocked by completing other characters' stories or going through parts of Libera Soul. The DLC characters, however, are much longer than even the main story. The only characters that don't have it are Tubi and Haomaru since they are guest characters added later on. The DLC stories are miles better than even the base ones because it fleshes out the characters rather than just fight these guys and then it's a done deal. Although I can't say the same for Hild because her story has only 3 to 4 fights. Zosomel's story has no fights and you have to unlock his last chapter by beating him powered up in Libera Soul. The fights themselves are hit and miss. Most of the time you fight a bunch of NPCs. They're neither too hard nor too easy. It's not horrible, but it's not the best as well. Like I said before, it's mostly listening to characters talk to each other and then a few fights happen. It's pretty mid at best, but I've played worse, so it's the best of the mid. Back to Soul Calibur 4, Part 2. This story mode is the lesser of Tales of Souls because it's a linear story. The only exception being your custom characters, which is randomized.
Nothing to do with their personality or outfits, dum-dum.
There's a total of 5 stages. Middle is always against the bonus characters, while the last stage has you face either Algol, Nightmare, or Siegfried depending on who you play as. The fights are stupidly easy on normal. I recommend playing it on hard. It provides a good challenge aside from a few fights that I don't even want to talk about. You can't ring out the final bosses. Nightmare drains your HP, Siegfried chips you, and Algol spam throws. Unlike Tower of Lost Souls, you don't need to customize your character, but it can help a little bit. The endings are also neat since they're in-game instead of FMVs, so you can see different outfits on your characters, including your customizations. It's another simply effective story campaign that's fun to go through. Is it Libera Soul or Libera Soul? The second part of Soul Calibur 6's story. This is a combination of Chronicles of the Sword and Weapon Master mode. Like Chronicles, your OC is the protagonist, and Weapon Master where you go on a journey going through stages with additional objectives and effects. The mode itself is better than the main story Chronicles because it's more involved and there's plenty of choices to be made. You could be evil or good. It coexists with the main story. You meet some of the main roster between the events of the story. Your character mostly involves themselves with Grow's organization. Grow is an okay character, but the main villain Aswell is nuts. He constantly talks about saving humanity, meanwhile killing people and turning his goons into malfested beings. Kind of like Injustice Superman. The fights themselves are also pretty good. Decent challenge with a few rough runs post-game. Fuck Inferno, by the way. He's a cheap input reading dirty vagina! You get a variety of weapons you earn or buy. All of them have different effects. Kinda reminds me of the Borderlands games in a way. Not what you want? You could use him for upgrading better ones. There's a lot to do in this mode, but as always, it's not perfect. The story itself can get boring with all that text. The stage effects are also tend to be repetitive. Who's the Joker that keeps splashing soapy water on the floor in every stage? Random encounters can get annoying when trying to travel, especially when it happens consecutively. And again, fuck Inferno. You're lucky you can't be selected in online modes. And people say Nightmare is annoying. Soul Calibur 3 is next. I'll start with Chronicles of the Sword. This one is the most unique out of all the story campaigns. It's a mix of real-time strategy and traditional Soul Calibur. The strategy game part is where you take over and defend strongholds while dealing with enemy generals. There are 4 types of units: Cavalry, Infantry, Knight, and Bandit. They can either handle auto battles or take over strongholds faster. I always go with Bandits since they're fast and take down strongholds easier. Auto battles were never my concern until the final mission. I always go for manual battle. And then there's the characters. All of them were designed through Create a Soul. Speaking of which, you can not only make your main character, you can also make more if you don't want to use the added units you've recruited. There are plenty of jobs to pick from. Like the units in the field map, each job has different stats. Not only do you encounter these NPCs, sometimes you face against the main roster. The fights themselves vary. Most strongholds have extra effects. Some of them can be helpful and some the polar opposite. They can result in cheap losses. Eventually the enemy AI tends to have a pattern, especially the katana users with their throw spamming habit. They'll even use the stronghold effects to their advantage, but so can you. There are a handful of ridiculous fights. Guardian Force and Strife. Need I say more? One more small gripe with this mode. There's not really a new game plus. You can replay through the whole story as much as you want, but all the enemies remain the same level as before. This is still a great campaign to go through. Breaks the mold and adds to RPG elements. The next is Tales of Souls. Instead of being a traditional arcade ladder, it's a non-linear story. Every character has a different route. There are lots of choices of paths. Some battles have quick-time events. You mess up, you lose HP, or get poisoned if you're up against Raphael. Every playthrough is different. Sometimes you face Tira, then Zasamel, or meet Zasamel earlier and then encounter someone like Raphael. The enemy AI can provide a challenge. However, some of them in the later stages are notoriously difficult, main culprits being Lizardman and Setsuka. Soul Calibur 3's AI is brutal, and this mode is no exception. Even the NPCs will give you a hard time. Sometimes there are bonus encounters. You can choose if you want to do them or not. You might end up fighting the shopkeepers, Charade, Lizardman, or even a giant statue! Eventually you're gonna have to go through the Destiny battle in the Grand Cathedral. Depending on who you play as, their difficulty varies. Abyss is a pain in the nuts to fight against, but that's to be expected since he's the final boss. You can still ring him out if you're sick of his input reading shiz. Abyss isn't the only final boss. There's also the Night Terror path. You have to follow a specific path without losing once. Easier said than done. Night Terror itself is also rough, but isn't as bad as going through the path. The endings are also diverse. There are in-game cutscenes with 2 outcomes. Unlike in Soul Blade, it tells you what prompt to input to get the other ending, instead of changing the letterbox and assume what buttons that needs to be pressed. I like Tales of Souls better than even Chronicles because it's not too long and you can manage to get through even the rougher fights without relying on cheesing the AI. Well, most of the time. Save the best for last. Soul Calibur 2's Weapon Master Mode is popular for a reason. It's a huge improvement over Soul Blade's Edge Master Mode. It's a full-scale adventure. However, it doesn't matter who you play as. The only difference when playing different characters is the rival Leon choosing the opponent your character faces in their Destiny battle at the start. The AI isn't as mean, but Soul Calibur 2's AI can get annoying at times in general. There are a bunch of weapons to buy. Some can be unlocked. A portion of the early game weapons are some of the best. The stages and objectives can vary. I've given enough examples so I'll save my breath this time and let you see the footage. The dungeons are also interesting to go through. There's a lot to unlock in Weapon Master Mode and it never gets old. It's not perfect despite being in the top spot. The story itself is nothing special. Some of the objectives are unfairly brutal, especially with a good amount of extra missions. Whoops, I forgot to mention that after beating the final boss. At least you could change characters at any time if you're struggling with a mission. Dungeons can be lengthy too, and you have to play through this mode to unlock 90% of the content, extra characters included. To get the Lizardman to complete Team Jobber, you have to beat Weapon Master Mode 100%. That's why I consider Weapon Master Mode to be the best out of all the main campaigns. The fluidity, the journey, and the amount of stuff to unlock. I still like Soul Calibur 3 the best, but I can't deny that Weapon Master Mode is still goated, even after 20 years. And that's about it. Listed off what was the weakest and the best campaigns. Do you agree or otherwise? Feedback is always welcome. The legend will never mind.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more of my stuff, subscribe and hit the bell, okay? Thanks, bye.